When CEO Big Shaq dares the black janitor's daughter to fix the impossible engine, the challenge ignites more than just a spark. In the shadow of betrayal and hidden conspiracies, a revelation shakes the foundation of power. What starts as a dare will end in a storm, where brilliance defies silence, and the world watches history rewrite itself. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. In the towering glass atrium of Grange Tech's corporate headquarters, where sunlight streamed through polished windows to reflect off walls adorned with accolades and blueprints, Shaquille O'Neal, known to the world as Big Shaq, stood amidst a circle of engineers in white coats. Despite his towering height and larger-than-life persona, he was relaxed, dressed in a tailored blazer over a graphic tee, listening intently as his team explained yet another setback on the company's most ambitious project, an experimental engine that promised to revolutionize automotive engineering. His deep voice, calm and warm, cut through their technical jargon with an almost fatherly ease. "All right, I hear you," he said. "But instead of telling me what went wrong, let's figure out how we're gonna fix it. We can't be afraid to think different." As the meeting adjourned and engineers filtered out, Shaq lingered near the massive prototype engine displayed like an oversized trophy in the center of the lab. His eyes, sharp and thoughtful despite his easygoing demeanor, scanned its intricate components. His mind replayed the story he'd been hearing for months, how this project was plagued with inexplicable failures, how nothing they did seemed to work. Yet something about the contradictions nagged at him, a puzzle he couldn't let go. But even with his considerable resources and influence, the answers seemed elusive. In that moment, his attention shifted to an unexpected scene. Near the employee lockers, half hidden by the shadows of the cavernous lab, a teenage girl sat on an overturned crate, her legs tucked underneath her. She was focused intently on a thick spiral notebook, balanced on her knees, her pencil moving in swift, confident strokes. Smudges of graphite darkened her fingers, and her brow furrowed in concentration. He recognized her immediately. Ariel Washington, the janitor's daughter. He'd seen her waiting for her father Samuel more times than he could count, always with her head buried in her sketches, lost in thought as though the world around her didn't exist. Shaq's curiosity piqued. With the quiet steps of a man used to making others feel at ease, he approached her. "What's got you so focused over there?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that nonetheless carried warmth. Ariel looked up, startled, her dark eyes wide, her pencil pausing in midair. "Just doodling," she said quickly, snapping the notebook shut. Shaq chuckled softly. "That doesn't look like just doodling. Mind if I take a look?" He gestured toward the notebook, and something in his tone, gently persuasive, not commanding, made her hesitate, then slowly hand it over. He flipped through pages of meticulously drawn engine schematics, equations and annotations that could rival any professional engineer's. His eyebrows rose, impressed. "You did all this yourself?" he asked. Ariel nodded, her shoulders tense as though waiting for the inevitable dismissal or condescension. But instead Shaq's lips curled into a grin. "This is good stuff, real good." He looked back at the experimental engine, then at her. An idea sparked in his mind, not a cruel dare, but a genuine challenge. "You know," he said, his tone light but thoughtful, "we've been beating our heads against the wall with that thing for months. Maybe we've been looking at it too long, missing something obvious. How about you take a crack at it? No pressure, just see what you can figure out." Ariel's jaw dropped. "Wait, you're serious?" she asked, her voice caught between disbelief and hope. Shaq nodded, his expression sincere. "Yeah. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? You spot something the rest of us missed. I say, let's see what you got." He held out the notebook to her, and after a stunned pause, she took it, her fingers trembling slightly. At that moment, Samuel Washington emerged from a side hallway, his janitor's cart rattling behind him. He froze when he saw Shaq speaking to his daughter, his expression tightening with unease. "Sir, is there a problem?" he asked cautiously. Shaq turned to him with a reassuring smile. "No problem at all. Your daughter here's got an eye for engines. I asked her to take a look at our prototype." Samuel's eyes flicked from Shaq to Ariel, disbelief and pride mingling with concern. "She's just a kid," he said quietly. "She's brilliant," Shaq countered, his voice soft but firm. "And sometimes it takes fresh eyes to see what we can't. I'm giving her a shot, Samuel. She deserves that much." The exchange drew the attention of a few lingering engineers, who murmured to each other, puzzled by the unexpected interaction. One of them, Dr. Gavin Rayan, Grange Tech's senior technical advisor, frowned as he observed the scene from a distance. He didn't like this sudden shift of focus, especially not with an uncredentialed teenager. But Shaq ignored the stares. "Ariel, if you're up for it, you can use one of the side labs. Just be careful. All right? Safety first." Ariel's face lit up with a mixture of excitement and nerves. "I'll be careful. Thank you, Mr. O'Neill," she said, her voice steadying as she realized the opportunity being offered. Shaq's smile broadened. "Call me Shaq," he said, his tone easy, as though inviting her into his circle of trust. "And if you need anything, tools, materials, whatever, you just ask. I'll make sure you've got what you need." As Ariel and Samuel exchanged a glance, a silent mixture of apprehension and hope, Shaq clapped Samuel lightly on the shoulder, a reassuring gesture. "Your daughter's got talent," he said. "Let's see where it takes her." He turned back toward the prototype engine, his mind already whirring with possibilities. Maybe, just maybe, this young girl was the spark his company needed. Not just to fix the engine, but to reignite the spirit of innovation that Grange Tech was meant to stand for. Unbeknownst to them all, Dr. Rand was already tapping messages into his phone, reporting the unexpected development to contacts whose interest in the Iron Phoenix project was anything but benign. But for now, in the golden afternoon light streaming through Grange Tech's atrium, Shaq's gesture had set something in motion, something far bigger than a simple challenge. A story of courage, talent, and the belief that the future belongs to those who dare to dream, was just beginning. At the heart of Grange Tech's sprawling glass and steel complex, Shaquille O'Neal, better known as Shaq, presided over an empire renowned for engineering innovation. Grange had once been a beacon of transformative ideas in the automotive world, but over the years the spark had dimmed, overshadowed by layers of bureaucracy, mismanagement, and unspoken compromises. Though the company's glossy public image showcased cutting-edge prototypes and ambitious plans, Shaq knew better than anyone that the pulse of real innovation was faltering. He'd inherited this empire through a combination of sharp business instincts and genuine brilliance, but it wasn't arrogance that kept him in the top seat. It was a burning desire to rekindle the fire that had once made Grange synonymous with progress. Shaq's office, a space filled with understated elegance and reminders of his past, from framed photos of his early years struggling to get a foot in the door of corporate engineering, to championship trophies commemorating his side passions, mirrored his character. Larger than life, but deeply grounded. His rise hadn't come easy. Born into modest circumstances, and always standing out, not just for his physical stature, but for his bold ideas and tenacity. He'd fought to be taken seriously, in a world that often valued pedigree over potential. That battle shaped his view of success. To Shaq, real power wasn't about dominating the boardroom. It was about creating opportunities for people overlooked by the system, giving the underdog a chance to rise. Yet, despite his best efforts, corruption crept into the company's veins. Departments that once thrived on experimentation and collaboration became silos, each protecting its turf. Contracts whispered of off-the-books dealings, and whispers of unauthorized technology transfers reached his ears. Grange's once proud legacy teetered on the brink of decay. Shaq wasn't blind to the growing influence of figures like Dr. Gavin Rand, the senior technical advisor whose polished demeanor concealed a ruthless ambition. Rand's network of influence both inside and outside the company was tightening its grip, threatening to suffocate the very innovation Grange Tech had been built on. Still, Shaq wasn't ready to abandon the fight. He doubled down, walking the production floors, showing up in labs unannounced, talking to mechanics, engineers, even the janitorial staff. It was during one of these walks that he first noticed Samuel Washington, a quiet man, with a dignified bearing, despite his blue uniform and cleaning cart. Samuel was methodical in his work, his eyes tracing equipment with a practiced, almost instinctual understanding. Shaq couldn't miss the subtle corrections Samuel made while cleaning. A misaligned pipe here, a poorly seated valve there, done as if on autopilot, unnoticed by the bustling engineers. Something about the man's quiet competence piqued Shaq's interest. But Samuel wasn't just a janitor. Years ago, he'd been a rising star in experimental engine design, with a mind sharp enough to identify flaws and propose innovative solutions that few others could grasp. However, after a fatal testing incident, one that claimed his closest friend Elijah Brooks, Samuel found himself cornered by corporate silence and institutional indifference. The fallout, combined with the burden of providing for his family after his reputation was quietly shredded, forced him into obscurity. Grange had offered him a maintenance position, not out of charity but as a way to keep him close to monitor and control the potential whistleblower they feared he might become. Ariel Washington, Samuel's daughter, had grown up in the shadow of that injustice. At 17, she embodied her father's brilliance, coupled with a youthful stubbornness that refused to accept the limitations imposed on them. Her notebooks brimmed with intricate engine schematics and alternative propulsion concepts, ideas that challenged conventional wisdom and dared to rethink the impossible. While other teenagers obsessed over social media and parties, Ariel spent evenings sketching designs in their garage, using salvaged parts her father brought home to build models and run simulations. She was an outsider, not by choice but by circumstance, a girl whose mind raced faster than her world allowed. Shaq recognized something of himself in Ariel's story. Though he'd never been forced into silence like Samuel, he knew what it meant to be underestimated, to have ideas dismissed because they came from someone who didn't fit the mold. That recognition wasn't just sympathy, it was a call to action. Shaq believed that innovation didn't belong to the elite. It belonged to those willing to push boundaries, to challenge norms, to dream without permission. He was determined to find and elevate voices like Ariel's, not because it made for good PR but because it was the right thing to do, and because he genuinely believed it was the key to saving his company from its own decay. Grange Tech's corporate world was a labyrinth of guarded secrets and strategic alliances. Executive offices hummed with coded conversations and hushed meetings, while the engineering floors, once teeming with eager minds, now operated under the shadow of constant surveillance and departmental rivalries. Technical decisions were no longer made purely for innovation's sake, but were filtered through layers of risk assessments, legal considerations, and profit forecasts. This was the world Shaq was struggling to untangle, a world where promising engineers were muzzled, where genuine breakthroughs were often sidelined in favor of safe, marketable half-measures. In this environment, Ariel's sudden presence, armed with her father's quiet wisdom and her own fearless ingenuity, felt like a breath of fresh air, even a potential lifeline. Shaq's decision to challenge her wasn't born from corporate strategy or a calculated play to win points with the board. It was a moment of genuine recognition, a spark of hope in a room that had grown too accustomed to conformity. He wasn't daring her to fail. He was daring her to succeed, to break the cycle, to prove that brilliance could come from anywhere, even from a janitor's daughter armed with a notebook and a relentless drive. And deep down, Shaq knew that his own survival as CEO, and Grange Tech's future, might very well depend on the gamble he was willing to take on Ariel Washington. The engine lab's hum filled the air as Ariel stood beside the prototype, her fingers tracing lines across its casing, her mind already reconstructing the pathways of pressure, torque, and thermal loads. Shaq watched from a few feet away, his tall frame leaning casually against a workbench, arms crossed, a subtle smile playing at his lips. Despite his imposing presence, there was no air of condescension, no trace of the dismissiveness she was used to from others in positions of power. Instead, there was a rare, genuine curiosity, a CEO who truly wanted to see what she could do. "You got a theory about why it's been failing?" Shaq asked, his tone light but his eyes sharp. Ariel hesitated, glancing at the array of disconnected sensors and misaligned components. "It's not just bad design," she said, her voice low, as if reluctant to admit it aloud. "Some of these faults feel intentional." Shaq's smile faded. He stepped closer, his tone softening. "Tell me what you see." Encouraged, Ariel pulled her notebook from her back pocket, flipping through hastily sketched diagrams and calculations. The fuel delivery system's rerouted in a way that causes pressure drops. Cooling lines are crisscrossed so they create hotspots. And the torque distribution, it's reversed. This isn't just sloppy work. Someone designed it to fail. For a long moment, Shaq said nothing. Then, with a slow nod, he sighed. "You're seeing what I've been suspecting, but couldn't prove. You're the first to spot the pattern." Ariel's breath caught. "You knew?" "I knew something was wrong," Shaq admitted, his voice low. "But I trusted people who were supposed to have my back. Dr. Rand, the senior team. They were feeding me reports, signing off on designs. I thought they were protecting the company's interests. Turns out they were protecting something else." Shaq's frustration simmered just beneath the surface. He'd built Grange Tech to be a place where bold ideas thrived, where innovation wasn't just a buzzword. But somewhere along the way, ambition had curdled into greed, and loyalty had become leverage. The Iron Phoenix conspiracy, the hidden truth behind the prototype's failure, was deeper than he'd imagined. And now, thanks to Ariel's sharp eye, the cracks were visible. "You weren't supposed to see this," he said, his voice low but resolute. "They thought no one would look close enough." Ariel glanced at him, determination rising in her chest. "But we did." Shaq's smile returned, this time laced with a hint of mischief. "Yeah, we did. And we're not done yet." With a few quiet calls, Shaq arranged for Ariel to have after-hours access to the lab. No cameras, no supervisors hovering. Just her, the prototype, and the freedom to explore. He even brought Dev Patel into the fold, a systems engineer who, despite his cynical exterior, still believed in the power of good engineering. Dev was skeptical at first, convinced this was another wild corporate gamble. But one look at Ariel's sketches, and he was hooked. "You're telling me you figured out the torque distribution flaw that's been killing this project for years?" Dev asked, incredulous. Ariel nodded, her hands smudged with grease, and her notebook opened beside her. "I didn't figure it out. I saw it. It was right there if anyone had bothered to look." Dev glanced at Shaq, his eyebrows raised. "You're telling me she's just, what? Some kid with a notebook?" Shaq grinned. "A kid with a notebook who just might save this company's future." As Ariel and Dev dove into the prototype, Shaq turned his attention to Lexi Grange, his niece and the only other person he trusted implicitly. Lexi had distanced herself from the company's inner workings, preferring her non-profit work and advocacy for ethical tech. But when Shaq explained what they were up against, her initial skepticism shifted to determination. "This isn't just corporate mismanagement," Lexi said, pacing the length of her apartment, her voice tight with anger. "If what you're saying is true, Dad, and Rand, they're sitting on a conspiracy that involves illegal tech transfers and cover-ups." Shaq nodded grimly. "And they're willing to sabotage their own people to keep it quiet." Together they uncovered hidden files, backdoor transactions, and secret shipments of classified components, pieces of the Iron Phoenix project that shouldn't have been anywhere near Grange Tech's civilian operations. With Dev's hacking skills, they unearthed logs and communication records that connected Rand to shadowy defense contractors and hinted at military involvement. "They were using Grange as a front," Dev concluded one night, as he reviewed the recovered files. "The prototype wasn't meant to work. It was a smokescreen for illegal tech." Ariel stood nearby, her mind spinning. "They set it up to fail, so no one would ask why they had the parts in the first place." Shaq paced the room, his fists clenching and unclenching. "They underestimated us. They thought I was too busy playing the CEO to notice. They thought you were just a janitor's daughter with a sharp pencil. They thought wrong. But it wasn't enough to know the truth. They needed proof, and a platform to reveal it." Ariel's sketches and Dev's data were compelling, but without a public forum, it would be easy for the conspiracy to be buried. That's when Lexi proposed a bold idea. "The Grange Tech Expo," she said. "It's next week. Media, investors, government officials. It's the perfect stage." Shaq's eyebrows rose. "You're suggesting we hijack my own company's showcase?" Lexi shrugged. "If you want to clear the rot from the inside out, you've got to shine a light where it hurts." The plan was risky. They'd have to move fast, sidestep security, and keep Ariel's work hidden until the big reveal. But for the first time in years, Shaq felt a surge of hope. Here was a chance to not just fix a broken machine, but to restore integrity to a company he loved, and to prove that brilliance could come from the most unexpected places. As the prototype systems whirred back to life under Ariel's touch, Shaq met her gaze across the lab. "You ready to show them what real engineering looks like?" Ariel grinned, her hands steady despite the magnitude of the challenge ahead. "Let's finish what we started." The faint hum of the lab's machinery was interrupted only by the rhythmic scratch of Ariel's pencil, as she jotted notes on her makeshift workstation. Shaq leaned back against a reinforced beam, arms crossed but mind racing. They had made progress real, measurable progress. The engine had purred under Ariel's hands for longer than anyone else had managed, and that alone should have been cause for celebration. But the deeper they delved into the prototype's hidden flaws, the more pieces of a darker puzzle emerged. It was Dev who stumbled onto the encrypted files late one night while running a diagnostic sweep of the system's firmware. He hadn't expected much, maybe a few technical logs or an overlooked memo. But what he found chilled him to the bone. His face was pale when he summoned Shaq and Ariel to the lab's control terminal. "You both need to see this," he said quietly. The decrypted data revealed a trail of corruption stretching far beyond the walls of Grange Tech. The Iron Phoenix project, it turned out, wasn't just an ambitious prototype gone awry. It was a cover for a classified military contract, one that had funneled experimental tech into the hands of private contractors with little oversight. Worse still, the sabotage wasn't accidental. The logs clearly indicated a remote override, an intentional shutdown sequence triggered at a precise moment. That sequence corresponded exactly to the test explosion that had killed Elijah Brooks. Shaq's breath caught, his mind flashing back to conversations with Elijah, a man he'd once called a friend and trusted collaborator. They had dreamed big back then, envisioning propulsion systems that could change the world. When the accident happened, Shaq had believed what he was told, that it was a tragic but unavoidable malfunction. Now the truth landed like a blow to his chest. Elijah hadn't died because of bad luck or flawed engineering. He'd been silenced. Ariel, reading over Shaq's shoulder, felt her hands tremble. "This was never about a failed engine," she whispered. "They killed him to keep the military involvement hidden." For a long moment, the lab was silent, except for the low hum of the cooling systems. Then Shaq straightened, his expression hardening with resolve. "They played me," he said, voice low and bitter. "They used my name, my company, to cover up a murder." Lexi, who had joined them after her own quiet investigation, exhaled sharply. "And they've been using Ariel's progress as a smokescreen," she said. "If she succeeds, they can claim the breakthrough as theirs. If she fails, they bury the whole mess." The weight of betrayal sat heavy on Shaq's broad shoulders. He'd built Grange Tech from the ground up, driven by a passion for innovation and a belief in the underdog spirit. He'd fought to make space for voices like Ariel's and Samuel's, people who saw the world not as it was but as it could be. Now he realized that his own optimism had blinded him to the rot festering beneath the surface. "I thought I was helping people," Shaq murmured, his voice thick with regret. "I thought I was building something that mattered." Ariel stepped closer, her young face fierce with determination. "You still can," she said. "Elijah's gone, but his work, his vision, it's still here. We can finish what he started." Shaq's gaze met hers, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of hope. But it wasn't just about technical success anymore. It was about justice, about truth, about proving that the voices they'd tried to silence couldn't be buried forever. "We need to expose this," he said. "All of it." Dev tapped at the keyboard, pulling up additional files, shipping manifests, encrypted communications, financial transactions, linking Grange executives to shadowy military contacts. "If we can get this data out," he said, "it'll show not just what happened to Elijah, but how deep this goes. This isn't just a bad apple situation. It's systemic." Lexi paced the length of the lab, her mind spinning. "The expo," she said suddenly, turning to face them. "It's the one place where we can show the world everything. Ariel's breakthrough, the sabotage, the cover-up. With media and investors watching, they won't be able to sweep it under the rug." Shaq hesitated. The risk was immense. Publicly revealing the corruption could destroy Grange Tech's reputation, alienate investors, and invite legal retribution. But the alternative, remaining complicit in Elijah's death and the continued deception, was unthinkable. Slowly, he nodded. "We'll do it," he said, "but we'll need a plan." Ariel's heart pounded as the pieces began to fall into place. The stakes were higher than she'd ever imagined, but so was the possibility of change. "We have to get the engine to the expo," she said. "It's not just about showing it works. It's about showing why it was made to fail." Shaq's voice was steady now, the weight of his past giving him strength. "And we'll show them that no matter how much they try to bury the truth, it always finds a way to rise." In the dim light of the lab, they gathered around the glowing schematics of the prototype. The lines and numbers no longer represented just technical challenges. They were symbols of resilience, of integrity, of a promise to a friend whose life had been stolen for greed and power. As the night deepened and their plan took shape, Shaq felt a shift within himself. He was no longer the genial CEO navigating corporate politics. He was a man who had been betrayed, a man who had lost a friend to corruption, and a man determined to make it right, not just for himself, but for everyone who believed in the power of innovation to change the world. "Let's finish what Elijah started," he said quietly, his voice carrying a fierce resolve. And with that, the final preparations for the battle at the expo began. The boardroom meeting scheduled in an hour would be more than a routine check-in. It was a high-stakes confrontation. Shaq knew that the revelations Dev had uncovered, combined with Ariel's progress, would unsettle the power players who had invested years into maintaining the status quo. He glanced at a message from Lexi, who was gathering evidence from their father's old files. It read, "Be careful today, they're circling." Shaq felt a weight settle between his shoulders. He wasn't just a CEO managing damage control anymore. He was the barrier standing between his team's fragile hope and the crushing weight of corruption. When he entered the boardroom, the atmosphere was taut with expectation. The members of the board, polished and practiced, offered polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. At the head of the table sat Dr. Rand, flanked by two senior executives who had been whispering in the corridors all week. Rand's voice, smooth but sharp, cut through the room as he gestured to the waiting files. "Shaquille, I'm sure you're aware of the recent, unauthorized activities in the prototype lab." Shaq kept his tone level. "I'm aware, and I'm also aware, that those activities are the only reason we have a functioning engine today." Rand's lips twitched. "An engine, yes, but at what cost? Corporate espionage, unauthorized access, potential liability. We can't risk our reputation on the work of an unvetted teenager and a janitor with an old grudge." The words hung heavy, but Shaq didn't flinch. "Ariel and Samuel have achieved more progress than our entire research division combined. If we suppress this, we're not just betraying innovation, we're betraying ourselves. And let's not pretend we didn't know about the military contracts." Ran. That admission shifted the mood, triggering a murmur of unease. One of the board members cleared her throat. "You're accusing us of—" "I'm stating facts," Shaq interrupted, his voice carrying quiet authority. "The cover-up stops here. We fix this engine, we reveal the truth, and we protect the integrity of this company. Anyone who can't support that vision is welcome to resign." Rand's expression hardened. "You're risking everything. Investors, government contracts. Contracts built on lies." Shaq shot back. "I won't let this company profit off deception and blood." The boardroom fell into a tense silence. Shaq could feel the shifting allegiances in the room, some leaning toward the security of silence, others stirred by his defiance. Finally, one of the older members spoke. "If you proceed with this, you'll need allies, people who can withstand the storm that's coming." "I already have them," Shaq said quietly. He rose, straightening his jacket, "and I'll make sure they're protected." Meanwhile, across town, Ariel, Lexi, Dev, and Samuel were deep into the reconstruction of the engine at the hidden workshop. The improvised space buzzed with focused energy as components were tested and recalibrated. Lexi's hands were stained with grease as she reviewed financial records and old schematics alongside Dev, their combined efforts pulling together fragments of a puzzle that was slowly forming a damning picture of corruption. Ariel worked with a fierce concentration that made time blur. Her sketches transformed into physical components. Theoretical calculations were translated into hardwired systems. Each adjustment to the engine felt like a defiance of the forces trying to silence them. But Lexi, moving between workstations, was starting to notice shadows, quiet conversations between men in dark suits, phone calls that stopped abruptly when she approached. "We're not alone," she said to Dev one night, as they packed up for a break. "They're watching us, waiting for a misstep." Dev nodded grimly. "We're close enough to the truth to make them nervous. That means we're also close enough to make this work." Back at Grange Tech, Shaq used his influence to buy his team more time. He called emergency meetings with compliance and legal teams, strategically tying up the board's attention with procedural audits. He ordered additional layers of encryption on access logs, subtly rerouting digital surveillance to create blind spots where Ariel and her allies could work uninterrupted. Every move he made felt like a chess game, each piece positioned to counter the board's maneuvers. At the same time, Lexi's role deepened beyond merely being Shaq's daughter. She used her knowledge of the company's inner workings to identify hidden vulnerabilities in the infrastructure of Grange Tech. Late at night, she combed through access logs and supply chain records, tracing deliveries of restricted components and documenting every deviation from standard protocols. She wasn't just fighting for the company's future. She was fighting to dismantle the corruption that had rotted it from the inside. One evening, as Shaq met her outside the secret workshop, he handed her a slim folder. "This is everything I've been able to collect," he said. "Email chains, shipping records, off-the-book payments. If anything happens to me or Ariel, you get this into the right hands." Lexi's eyes shimmered with determination. "Nothing's going to happen. We're going to finish this. Together." Shaq's laugh was low but genuine. "You remind me of your mother," he said, She never backed down from a fight either. In the days that followed, the workshop became a crucible of tension and triumph. Each breakthrough brought them closer to a complete operational engine. Each misstep was a reminder of the forces aligned against them. Shaq juggled corporate sabotage, Lexi navigated covert resistance, and Ariel turned raw sketches into reality, her hands steady despite the mounting pressure. They knew the final confrontation at the expo was approaching. But even as the walls seemed to close in, their resolve only hardened. They weren't just fixing an engine. They were forging a statement, a declaration that the underdog, the overlooked, and the underestimated wouldn't just survive the storm. They would emerge from it stronger, smarter, and ready to claim their place in a world that had tried to keep them out. And at the center of it all stood Shaq, not just a CEO, but a man who refused to let his company become another chapter in the story of corruption and compromise. He had always believed in second chances, in himself, in the people he led, and now, in a teenage girl who was about to show the world just how powerful integrity could be. The Grange Tech Expo was a spectacle of polished glass, high ceilings, and high-stakes promises. Investors, government officials, and industry titans filled the auditorium with an electric buzz of anticipation. Towering screens displayed looping images of sleek concept vehicles and futuristic propulsion systems, accompanied by a carefully crafted narrative of corporate success. But behind the scenes, Shaq's pulse quickened. He knew the real show was just beginning. Ariel stood with her team in the wings, her palms cool against the smooth control tablet she had rigged herself. Lexi whispered last-minute encouragement, while Dev adjusted the calibration settings one final time. Even Samuel, who usually shied from the spotlight, stood straighter, his hands calm despite the tension. This was it. The moment they'd risked everything for. Shaq's cue came as he stepped into the light, his broad frame commanding attention, as murmurs rippled through the room. Gone was the jovial, backslapping CEO persona the audience had come to expect. In its place was a man whose voice, though calm, carried the weight of truth. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today, not just as the CEO of Grange Tech, but as someone who's learned the hard way what happens when integrity is compromised for ambition. The crowd stilled. Cameras zoomed in. Shaq continued, his words deliberate and clear. For too long we've hidden behind polished prototypes and glossy presentations, but no more. Today we reveal not what we hope to achieve, but what we almost lost to deception. As he gestured to the side of the stage, Ariel and her team emerged, wheeling the real engine, its exposed framework a stark contrast to the chrome-plated mock-up already on display. The audience gasped. The prototype was unmistakably functional, humming with potential energy and raw innovation.
This, Shaq declared, is the product of courage, brilliance, and perseverance. Ariel Washington, the daughter of one of our longest-serving janitors, is the mind behind this breakthrough.
Alongside her father Samuel, Dev Patel, and my daughter Lexi, they exposed a conspiracy that cost lives and nearly buried the truth under bureaucracy and greed. Ariel's heart raced, but she met the eyes of the crowd with quiet confidence. She approached the microphone as Shaq stepped aside, his pride palpable. "This engine works," she said simply, her voice steady. "It runs not because of deception or corporate muscle, but because we refused to give up, because we believed in solutions others called impossible." The screens behind her flickered, revealing damning evidence, schematics with corrections, shipping manifests highlighting illegal transfers, and internal emails implicating corrupt executives. Lexi's careful curation of the files ensured the story was crystal clear. This wasn't an accident or misunderstanding, but a calculated cover-up. Dr. Ran, flanked by security, attempted to interrupt, his voice raised and urgent. "This is corporate sabotage." Shaq raised his hand, silencing him with a commanding shake of his head. "No, Ran. The real sabotage was allowing lies and ambition to override ethics and humanity. I was blind to it for too long. But no more." The audience murmured louder, shifting uncomfortably as the depth of the deception became clear. Reporters scribbled frantically, and social media feeds lit up with live updates. Dev initiated a live demonstration, starting the engine with a soft hum that quickly built into a smooth, powerful whir. It was unmistakable proof. The engine was real, operational, and revolutionary. As the machine ran, Ariel stepped back, her shoulders square as she took in the culmination of their work. Shaq joined her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I once believed that leadership was about results," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. But today, I see it's about responsibility, about standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. Ariel reminded me of that. The emotional payoff was undeniable. Shaq's visible pride in Ariel's courage, his public acknowledgement of his own failings, and his unwavering commitment to rebuilding Grange Tech on ethical lines resonated deeply. Even those who had arrived expecting a slick sales pitch found themselves captivated by the raw honesty of the moment. I won't let this company stand as a monument to greed, Shaq continued. We're going to rebuild, from the ground up, with transparency, integrity, and innovation, and that starts today. Detective Mendez, waiting at the auditorium's edge, with a team of federal agents, stepped forward, her badge glinting under the spotlights. Dr. Ran, you and several others are under investigation for conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice, she announced, her tone firm but professional. Security moved in quietly, escorting Ran and his co-conspirators from the hall, their protests swallowed by the rising buzz of the crowd. Ariel's breath hitched, not from fear but from relief. Lexi wrapped an arm around her, murmuring, "You did it. You all did it." The real engine continued its smooth operation, an unwavering symbol of what determination and integrity could achieve. Shaq, his voice carrying the resonance of finality, addressed the audience one last time. This is not just about one company, one project, or one engine. It's about the kind of world we want to build, one where talent is recognized, truth is valued, and innovation serves humanity, not just profits. The applause started as a scattered ripple but quickly swelled into a wave of genuine admiration. Even seasoned executives and skeptical investors found themselves moved by the moment's authenticity. Ariel felt the weight of the world shift, just slightly, but enough to mark a beginning rather than an end. As the engine wound down, the applause faded into murmured conversations about justice, innovation, and the future. Ariel and her team stood together, not as a ragtag group of underdogs, but as the architects of a new era for Grange Tech, and perhaps for the entire industry. Shaq's gaze met Ariel's, his smile warm and resolute. "You changed everything," he said softly. "Now let's finish what we started." Dr. Rand's protests, once sharp and indignant, had faded to resigned murmurs as he and his inner circle were led from the venue, their tailored suits and practiced bravado stark against the reality of handcuffs. Walter Grange, stoic yet pale, followed closely behind, his confident public persona unraveling in full view of the very stakeholders he had once sought to impress. In the days that followed, the world watched as the story unfolded. Media outlets dissected every detail, from the evidence Lexi had unveiled on stage, to the footage of Ariel's engine running flawlessly before a stunned audience. The headlines weren't kind to Walter or his allies. Tech titans fall from grace, Iron Phoenix scandal exposed, teen prodigy shatters corporate corruption. Even the most loyal of Grange Tech's board members couldn't spin this as a misstep. It was a full-blown reckoning. Shaq, however, navigated the chaos with a quiet resilience. After the expo, he called an emergency board meeting, not to defend his position as CEO, but to resign it. He stood before the assembled members, his voice calm and resolute. "I've spent my career trying to build a company that valued innovation and integrity," he said. "But I let ambition and bureaucracy blind me to the corruption that was festering under my nose. It took the courage of people like Ariel, Lexi, and Dev to open my eyes. Now, it's time for me to step aside and make room for a new kind of leadership." There was a murmur of surprise among the board members. Shaq's departure wasn't the defensive retreat of a disgraced executive. It was the deliberate choice of a leader who understood that real change required sacrifice. Before leaving, he made one final motion: to create an independent ethics and innovation board, empowered to oversee Grange Tech's future research and corporate governance. The motion passed unanimously. As word of Shaq's decision spread, public opinion shifted. Articles praised his integrity, contrasting it sharply with Walter's self-serving lies. Commentators described Shaq's move as the blueprint for ethical leadership, noting how he had stepped down not in defeat, but in solidarity with those he had once underestimated. For Shaq, though, the accolades meant little compared to the quiet sense of purpose he now felt. The new Ethics and Innovation Board, chaired by Lexi, became a beacon for reform. Shaq accepted an honorary leadership role, focusing his efforts on mentorship and advocacy for underrepresented engineers. He spent his days visiting schools, hosting workshops, and collaborating with technical institutes to create pathways for young minds who might otherwise be overlooked. His towering presence, once the symbol of a corporate giant, became a familiar and comforting sight in classrooms and community centers. Ariel and her team found themselves at the heart of a new movement. With Shaq's public support and Lexi's strategic guidance, they began working with Grange Tech to implement the innovative engine design into practical, community-focused applications. Dev, reinstated with full honors, led a complete overhaul of the company's R&D practices, ensuring transparency and ethical standards that would set a new industry benchmark. For Samuel, the shift was deeply personal. He received multiple offers, executive positions, advisory roles, even media appearances, but chose instead to return to what mattered most: hands-on engineering and education. Together with Dev, he co-founded the Brooks Engineering Institute, named in honor of his late friend Elijah Brooks. The institute quickly became known for its groundbreaking approach to education, combining technical rigor with an unflinching commitment to social responsibility. In the months after the expo, Lexi emerged as a quiet but formidable leader. She steered Grange Tech's transition with a steady hand, dismantling the old guard and promoting a culture of openness and collaboration. Her speeches, though measured, resonated with sincerity. "We're not just rebuilding a company," she said at the first shareholders meeting after the scandal. "We're redefining what it means to be a company in the first place." Ariel's world transformed in ways she hadn't imagined. Universities clamored to offer her full scholarships, while venture capitalists lined up to fund her own startup ventures. Yet she remained grounded. Her focus clear: she wanted to use her skills to create technologies that served real needs, clean, efficient engines for communities left behind by corporate greed. She launched Forge Core with a handful of trusted allies, including Lexi and Dev, determined to prove that innovation could be both profitable and principled. Throughout it all, Shaq remained a mentor and ally. His regular check-ins with Ariel weren't formal consultations, but genuine conversations filled with shared ideas, laughter, and mutual respect. "You know," he said during one of their walks through Forge Core's bustling prototype floor, "when I first dared you to fix that engine, I was hoping you'd prove me right. What you did, though, was so much bigger. You didn't just prove me right, you reminded me why I started this journey in the first place." As for Walter and his conspirators, the legal consequences were swift and unforgiving. Federal prosecutors charged them with fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Their trials became high-profile spectacles, with the evidence laid bare for the world to see. Walter's name, once synonymous with technological ambition, became a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked greed and arrogance. But even as the courts handed down verdicts, the world's attention had shifted, not to the downfall of corrupt executives, but to the rising tide of new innovators, who were determined to do better. The Grange Tech Expo, once envisioned as a showcase of corporate power, had instead sparked a revolution. In classrooms, workshops, and boardrooms around the world, young engineers whispered Ariel's name as inspiration. Lexi's leadership set a precedent for corporate reform. Shaq's decision to step down transformed him from a charismatic CEO into a revered advocate for ethical innovation. As the sun set over the city, a new chapter unfolded. Grange Tech was no longer the fortress of exclusion it had once been. It was becoming a place where ingenuity and integrity thrived side by side, where engineers like Ariel were celebrated not despite their background but because of it. And at the heart of this transformation stood a former janitor's daughter, a once doubted CEO in a company willing to bet everything on doing what was right. In the quiet of his modest office, Shaq looked out at the city skyline and smiled. His journey as CEO might be over, but his role as a mentor, innovator, and champion of change had just begun. In the months following the Grange Tech Expo, the world outside the high towers of corporate power and sterile boardrooms buzzed with a new energy. Ariel Washington, once an unknown teenager sketching engines on the margins of her father's shift, now stood at the helm of Forge Core, a startup born not from wealth or inherited connections, but from raw determination and belief in the transformative power of technology. The Forge Core lab, set in a revitalized warehouse where broken machines once lay abandoned, now thrived with life. Prototypes hummed, test engines whirred, and young engineers from every walk of life gathered around design tables to exchange ideas with an urgency and creativity rarely seen in traditional corporate labs. Ariel walked through this space, her mind juggling design schematics with business strategies, her heart buoyed by a purpose that went far beyond profit margins. Forge Core wasn't just a company, it was a statement. Its mission was clear: create technologies that served real people, especially those in communities ignored by mainstream industry. The first wave of engines rolled off the line not for high-performance luxury vehicles, but for essential needs: irrigation systems for rural farmers, low-maintenance generators for remote clinics, and affordable transport moguls for emergency services in disaster-prone regions. And at the heart of each design was a principle Ariel had absorbed from her father's quiet wisdom: innovation should empower, not exclude. Shaq was never far from this evolving vision. While he had stepped down as Grange Tech's CEO, his influence had only deepened. He attended ForgeCore's launch in person, his presence unmistakable as he shared an easy laugh with young engineers, offered feedback on prototypes, and encouraged teams to push boundaries. His mentorship wasn't distant or performative. It was deeply personal. "Don't be afraid to dream bigger than they tell you," he said during a ForgeCore workshop. "When you see a door closed, build a new one. And if you can't find the tools, call me. I'll bring them myself." His network of industry contacts opened doors that might have otherwise remained shut for Ariel and her team. Suppliers, investors, and thought leaders who had once hesitated to engage with an unproven upstart now found themselves drawn in, compelled by Shaq's endorsement and by the undeniable brilliance of ForgeCore's early successes. But it was more than connections that made ForgeCore thrive. It was Ariel's insistence on integrity, on listening to the needs of the people her technology was meant to serve. At every turn, she pushed for transparency, for community involvement, and for real-world testing that prioritized functionality over marketing hype. Meanwhile, Samuel Washington, long content to watch from the sidelines, found his life transformed in ways he had once deemed impossible. Inspired by Ariel's success and emboldened by Shaq's unwavering support, he and Dev Patel officially launched the Brooks Engineering Institute. Named to honor the late Elijah Brooks, the institute opened its doors with a mission to equip students from underserved communities with both technical skills and ethical foundations. Its workshop floors were filled with the same buzz as ForgeCore's, though here the focus was as much on learning as on building. Shaq played a crucial role in this venture, not just as a benefactor but as a public advocate. He used his public platform to draw attention to the systemic barriers that had long kept brilliant minds like Samuel's and Ariel's out of the spotlight. His speeches weren't grandstanding. They were deeply personal, weaving his own journey from an underestimated outsider to a titan of industry into a call for systemic change. "It's not about charity," he said during the Institute's inaugural ceremony, his voice rich with conviction. "It's about justice. It's about making sure no kid has to choose between their potential and their paycheck. It's about making sure that if you've got the spark, you've got the tools to turn it into fire." The Brooks Engineering Institute quickly earned a reputation for producing engineers who were as fearless in their ethics as they were inventive in their designs. Its graduates were snapped up by top firms and startups alike, not just for their technical skills, but for their unwavering commitment to doing what was right. Dev's leadership emphasized hands-on learning, community engagement, and mentorship from experienced professionals who had weathered the storms of the industry. Samuel, once a janitor pushing a mop through silent halls, now stood at the helm of an educational revolution. Back at Grange Tech, Lexi Grange led a transformation that few thought possible. With Shaq's reforms embedded into the company's structure, she reimagined the corporate culture from the inside out. Under her leadership, the company shifted focus from chasing military contracts and profit margins to sustainable innovation and social responsibility. Departments were restructured, priorities realigned, and new policies implemented to encourage ethical decision-making at every level. Gone were the secretive labs and silenced voices. In their place were open forums, diverse leadership teams, and partnerships with institutions like the Brooks Engineering Institute to create a direct pipeline for new talent. Shaq's involvement, though less direct, remained a steadying force. His role on the Ethics and Innovation Board ensured that decisions were scrutinized, not just for profit potential, but for their broader social impact. He championed policies that prioritized environmental sustainability, inclusivity, and transparency values that had once been seen as secondary to a company's bottom line. His presence served as a constant reminder of what leadership should look like: humble, accountable, and deeply connected to the people its decisions affected. For Ariel, Samuel, Lexi, and Shaq, the resolution of their journeys didn't signal an ending, but a new beginning. The shadows of conspiracy and sabotage had been replaced by the light of innovation and integrity. ForgeCore's breakthroughs were already inspiring similar ventures across industries, while the Brooks Engineering Institute's approach to education was setting a new standard for technical learning. Grange Tech, once a symbol of corruption, was on its way to becoming a model for corporate responsibility and community engagement. As Shaq stood one quiet evening at the edge of Forge Core's testing field, watching the latest prototype glide effortlessly across the track, he felt a profound sense of satisfaction. He had seen firsthand what could happen when barriers were broken and voices were heard. The world had tried to silence talent, to bury brilliance beneath bureaucracy and greed, but here it was, thriving, loud and impossible to ignore. Ariel joined him, her gaze following the prototype's sleek silhouette against the setting sun. "Do you think we've done enough?" she asked, her voice thoughtful but tinged with the restless energy of someone already dreaming of the next challenge. Shaq smiled, his eyes reflecting the quiet determination that had carried him through his own battles. "It's never enough," he said. "That's the point. You keep building, you keep pushing, and you make sure the next kid who's told they can't do it knows they're not alone." In that moment, as the prototype completed its flawless circuit, and the Forge Core team erupted in cheers, the future felt wide open, not just for them but for every young mind waiting to be heard. The museum's lighting bathed the exhibit in a soft glow, casting long shadows of the engine's components against the floor. School groups lingered, their eyes wide as guides explained how a teenager's relentless pursuit of a solution had exposed a web of corruption and rewritten the narrative of corporate innovation. Parents pointed out the photographs of Shaq standing proudly beside Ariel, his arm around her shoulders, his presence both protective and celebratory. They explained to their children that this wasn't just a story of technology but one of courage, mentorship, and the transformative power of belief. In a quiet alcove of the exhibit, a video played on loop, a montage of interviews and archival footage. It featured clips from the Grange Tech Expo, where Shaq had given Ariel the stage to unveil the real engine, while he, the towering CEO, stood back and let her brilliance shine. His voiceover accompanied images of the chaotic yet triumphant scene. "When you see someone with a spark," he said, his tone gentle yet resolute, "it's your job to make sure they have everything they need to turn that spark into a flame. That's not just leadership. That's humanity." For Shaq, this legacy wasn't about trophies or accolades. It was about moments like these, watching a new generation step forward, knowing he had played a part in clearing the path. After stepping down from his CEO role, Shaq had dedicated himself to serving on ethics and innovation boards, pushing for policies that prioritized mentorship, inclusion, and transparency. His speeches at conferences were no longer about market share or quarterly earnings, but about the responsibility that came with influence. He spoke of the cost of ignoring talent, of the injustice of silencing voices that dared to challenge the status quo. In one particularly powerful clip, he addressed an audience of young engineers and industry leaders. "You can't just be about the bottom line," he said, his voice rich with conviction. "You have to be about the future. And the future belongs to the people who have been underestimated, overlooked, and told they don't belong. My job and your job is to make sure they know they do." Back in Washington, D.C., the museum's visitors lingered near a wall inscribed with testimonials from Forge Core engineers, Brooks Institute students, and even former Grange Tech employees, who had been part of the company's transformation under Lexi's leadership. Each story echoed a common theme: the impact of believing in potential, of creating spaces where ideas flourished because they were nurtured, not because they conformed to corporate norms. Ariel herself often visited the exhibit, though she rarely announced her presence. One evening, as she stood silently near her engine, a young girl approached, her eyes reflecting a mix of awe and determination. "Is it really true?" she asked. "Did you really build this when you were just 17? Ariel knelt slightly to meet the girl's gaze, her smile gentle, but firm. "Yes," she said, "but I didn't do it alone. There were people who believed in me, who gave me a chance to prove what I could do. And now, it's your turn. Don't wait for permission. Start building." That message reverberated far beyond the walls of the Smithsonian. Around the world, stories of Ariel's journey inspired initiatives aimed at leveling the playing field in science and technology. Universities revamped admissions policies, corporations restructured hiring practices, and community organizations launched mentorship programs targeting young innovators from marginalized backgrounds. The phrase "the Ariel effect" entered common parlance, not as a marketing slogan, but as a reminder of what was possible when power was used to empower. At Forge Core, the work continued. Ariel's team expanded, tackling new challenges in sustainable transportation and community-centered engineering. Samuel Washington, now a revered figure in the industry, continued his work at the Brooks Engineering Institute, where he mentored students with the same quiet patience and sharp insight he had once used to rebuild salvaged engines in his garage. Dev Patel's innovative curriculum ensured that graduates left not just with technical expertise, but with a deep understanding of their ethical responsibilities as engineers. Lexi Grange, having redefined her family's legacy, served on the boards of both ForgeCore and the Brooks Institute, using her platform to advocate for systemic change in corporate culture. Her speeches reminded industry leaders that true success was measured not by profits, but by the positive impact they left behind. Her reforms at Grange Tech rippled outward, inspiring similar shifts in companies that had once prioritized secrecy and control over collaboration and openness. In this new landscape, innovation was no longer a privilege reserved for the well-connected. It was a right, a shared endeavor that thrived when barriers were broken and bridges were built. The stories told in the Smithsonian exhibit, the sketches on napkins, the late-night rebuilds, the moment when a teenage girl powered up an engine before a stunned audience became symbols of a movement that extended far beyond one company, one family, or one breakthrough. Shaq's final reflection, shared in a recorded message played at the exhibit's closing, captured the essence of this transformation. "The real story," he said, his voice resonating through the hall, "isn't just about an engine. It's about what happens when we stop underestimating people, when we start lifting them up. It's about seeing potential where others see limits, and choosing to believe in the power of that potential. Because when you do, you're not just building machines, you're building a future where everyone has a chance to make their mark." The camera panned to the engine's polished surface, its contours gleaming under the exhibit lights, then to the photos of Shaq and Ariel, side by side, smiling not as CEO and innovator, but as mentor and student, as allies in a shared mission. The final shot lingered on a simple plaque that read, "Innovation doesn't belong to companies or institutions. It belongs to anyone brave enough to ask, what if, and determined enough to find the answer." And so, long after the crowds dispersed and the lights dimmed, the legacy of Ariel and Shaq's partnership remained, not just in the engine's hum or the museum's quiet reverence, but in the countless sparks ignited in the hearts of those who had once been invisible, waiting for a chance to shine. Innovation isn't just for the boardrooms. It's born from the bold, the underestimated, the ones willing to ask what if. If you've ever felt like your ideas were too big, too different, or too risky, this is your moment to lean in. Let's build a future where every voice matters, where the next breakthrough starts with you.